The Last Sultan, The Life and Times of Ahmet Ertegun, by Robert Greenfield. Narrated by Robert Fass. Copyright 2011 by Schoolyard Productions, Incorporated. This unabridged audiobook is published by arrangement with Robert Greenfield, care of Paul Bresnik Literary Agency, LLC, and was produced in the year 2011 by Tantor Media, Incorporated, which holds the copyright thereto. He was hip. He was hip to the tip, as we say. He was not a square. He was someone who understood the idiom. Herb Abramson, founding partner of Atlantic Records, on Ahmet Ertegun. Ahmet had eyes to make records. He also had ears and tremendous taste. Jerry Wexler, who succeeded Abramson as Ahmet Ertegun's partner at Atlantic Records. Ahmet was sui generis, and then he made himself up as he went along. Henry Kissinger, Ahmet Ertegun's friend. Prologue. A Day of Tribute in New York. April 17th, 2007. In the tiny village New York can sometimes become when it honors one of its own who has fulfilled the dream of hope on which the city was built, the all-star tribute to Ahmet Ertegun, scheduled to begin at 6 p.m., in the Rose Theater at the Time Warner Center on Columbus Circle, was the talk of the town. Those who had labored long and hard to bring about what promised to be the event of the season, one of those once-in-a-lifetime evenings that could never happen anywhere else, literally could not think about anything else. In his office at Rolling Stone magazine, Jann Wenner, who, along with film director Taylor Hackford, was producing the event, nervously wondered whether his old friend Mick Jagger was going to perform this evening. Ensconced in a suite at the Carlisle Hotel, Jagger, who had lost his 93-year-old father only a few months earlier, was incommunicado. Making matters worse, Wenner had just learned that Keith Richards, who had been scheduled to do 60-Minute Man by Billy Ward and the Dominoes at the tribute, had gone to England to be with his ailing 91-year-old mother, and so would not be able to perform. The invitation-only tribute was still the hottest ticket in town. Entry to the private party following the event at the boathouse in Central Park was so tightly controlled that those who feared they would not be allowed to attend either function were frantically doing all they could to wangle their way onto the guest list, even at the very last minute. Faced with the daunting task of doling out 1,200 free tickets to an event that could have easily filled a much larger venue, Ahmet's assistant, Frances Chantley, had unwittingly turned up the pressure by insisting there be no reserved seating. To her way of thinking, those who truly loved Ahmet would be there early. Showing no respect for the dead, a reporter from the New York Post's always scurrilous Page 6 gossip column, which had previously run a blind item about an aging record executive with a cane engaging in scandalous behavior with two women, called Ahmet's grieving widow at home that afternoon to ask if it was true that other women who were involved with her late husband would be at the tribute. As always, Mika Ertegun patiently explained that Americans did not understand how European women viewed such matters. While she had not yet been able to bring herself to watch PBS's American Masters documentary about Ahmet, the film had been shown the night before at the Anthology Film Archives in the East Village. On the afternoon of the tribute, the documentary was shown again in a plush screening room at the Time Warner Center, where cellophane-wrapped cookies bearing Ahmet's likeness from Eleni's Bakery were given to invited guests, along with a 60th anniversary Atlantic Records commemorative CD distributed by Starbucks, featuring 17 songs Ahmet had selected before his death. Many of those who attended the screening decided the wisest course of action was to wait there until the tribute began. Patiently, they then stood in line before a brace of secretaries who checked their names off lists before allowing them to board elevators to the fifth-floor theater. Leaving no doubt the stars had come out tonight for Ahmet, and it was only in New York that such an event could have taken place, Tom Wolfe strolled through the lobby as Helen Mirren stepped from the elevator to join the crowd waiting to enter the theater. Standing in a long line of well-coiffed women in elegant dresses, carrying little handbags suspended from gold chains, and silver-haired captains of industry in expensive suits and dark blue blazers, the punk singer and poet Patti Smith looked incongruous, yet somehow also at home. Wearing black, Mika Ertegun sat in the front row of the theater with Ahmet's family and many of the artists who were scheduled to perform. As people filled the seats, there was a good deal of air-kissing, embracing, and handshaking across the rows. A large photograph of Ahmet stood on a bare stage, framed by small trees. Befitting the course of his career, the program began with jazz. Followed by horn players and 2 drummers, Wynton Marsalis, the artistic director of jazz at Lincoln Center, and a member of the selection committee of the Jazz Hall of Fame that Ahmet had founded in his brother Nesuhi's name in 2004, walked through a side door playing trumpet like the second coming of Louis Armstrong on "Oh, Didn't He Ramble," a number often performed by New Orleans brass bands on their way back from a funeral. Larger than life, and sitting on a gilded throne in a 3-piece suit, the great soul singer Solomon Burke spoke of the little Turkish prince, our beloved brother Ahmet. Eric Clapton, whom Ahmet had first heard play 40 years earlier at the Scotch of St. James in London, then took the stage. Wearing glasses, with his hair closely cropped, Clapton said, "I loved Ahmet. He was like a father to me. In the old days we'd have a drink and do some other things, and any time that happened he would start singing songs to me. We're going to do 2 of the songs he always sang, Send Me Someone to Love, and the other by Styx McGee called Drinkin' Wine Spodioti." Backed by Dr. John on piano, a drummer, and a bass player, Clapton performed masterful versions of both songs. He then gave way to New York City's billionaire mayor, Michael Bloomberg, who concluded his remarks by declaring, "And let us say, Ahmet." The mayor was followed by Henry Kissinger, Bette Midler, Benny King, Kid Rock, and Sam Moore of Sam and Dave. After describing Ahmet as a ducker and diver who gave up his student visa to remain in America so he could make his life in music, Taylor Hackford introduced a videotaped statement by an ailing Jerry Wexler in Florida. Looking old and gaunt in a soft brown sailor's cap, glasses, and a green shirt without a collar, Wexler talked about Ahmet's sense of irony and tomfoolery, and how he could be speaking in French to the French ambassador, only to hang up the phone to greet a black musician by saying, "Hey, Holmes, what you know good?" Saying he did not know if he had ever specifically thanked Ahmet for giving him a life by making him a partner at Atlantic when he had no qualifications whatsoever and no experience, Wexler stared directly into the camera and with the New York street accent he had never lost said, "Ahmet, thank you for opening the door for me. Thank you." On a completely black stage, Phil Collins sat down at the piano to perform a stunning version of In the Air Tonight, the song Ahmet had helped make a hit. After David Geffen told his classic and oft-repeated Bumping Into Geniuses story about Ahmet, Stevie Nicks sang Stand Back and her version of Led Zeppelin's Rock and Roll. Jann Wenner read a letter from Keith Richards in which the Stones guitarist said he had looked up to Ahmet as he did to Muddy Waters. Then Wenner talked about Ahmet's formative role in the creation of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. He also recalled that when he asked Mika why Ahmet had looked so well while he was lying in a coma in the hospital, she told him, "Well, he hasn't been drinking." Bette Midler then returned to do her version of Bobby Darin's Beyond the Sea. More than 2 hours into the proceedings, Mick Jagger stepped to the podium. In a suit, a white shirt, and no tie, with his long hair trailing over his ears, a relaxed Jagger delivered what most people agreed was the best speech of the evening. Obviously enjoying himself, he began his remarks by saying, "Ahmet was a father figure, this is true, but to me he was more like the wicked uncle with the wicked chuckle." Addressing what he called a diverse and fascinating group of people like ourselves, Jagger noted how only Ahmet could talk about geopolitics and medieval Islamic history and then pick the next Vanilla Fudge single. Jagger ended his remarks by reminiscing about a party during the 1970s when Ahmet had volunteered to hire strippers to entertain the Stones and then contacted an agency called the Widows Club, who provided rotund women of a certain age who stripped for free on the weekends. Crosby, Stills and Nash then took the stage. With Graham Nash on mouth harp and Stephen Stills on guitar, they did their version of the Beatles' In My Life. Nash then said, "Here's our friend Neil." Hulking and stoop-shouldered, with long hair and gray sideburns, Neil Young played acoustic guitar on Helplessly Hoping. After the song ended, Nash said, "Here's something you don't see every day. I'm looking forward to this myself. This is Neil and Stephen doing a Buffalo Springfield song." He and Crosby then left the stage. Leaning into the microphone, Young said, "Ahmet was our man. I just hope that today's musicians have someone like Ahmet taking care of them. Mika, thank you so much for taking care of him." Without having rehearsed, Stills and Young began playing Mr. Soul, the classic Buffalo Springfield song Young had written in 1966, but the two men had not performed together in 40 years. Playing rhythm with so much intensity that he became a one-man band, Young sang in a haunting voice as Stills picked out the leads on his white Washburn electric guitar. Together they created the kind of musical magic for which Ahmet had lived. When they were done, Young put his hands together and looked up at the heavens as though to give thanks the performance had all come out right in the end. Ending the tribute nearly 3 hours after it began, Wynton Marsalis walked down the aisle playing Down by the Riverside. As though they were now in a church, the crowd got to their feet and began clapping their hands in time. At the party that followed, Kid Rock and Dave Mason of Traffic, backed by Paul Schaefer's band, performed Feelin' All Right, and Solomon Burke sang Cry to Me. While the evening was, as Eric Clapton wrote in his autobiography, both entertaining and emotionally stirring, the guitarist would also note, "I still felt that had Ahmet been there in the flesh, he would have said something like, 'Let's get out of here and find the real shit.'" Once he had found it, Ahmet would have drained every glass set before him and tapped his foot in time to the beat while telling the stories he loved best. Staying until the last note of music had been played, he would not have made his way home until the sun was rising. And then, just as he had always done while running Atlantic Records for 7 decades, Ahmet would have checked in to see how his business was doing. Like the subject of the song Wynton Marsalis had played to begin the tribute, Ahmet Ertegun had rambled in and out of town. He had rambled through the city and the street. Throughout the course of his long and astonishing life, Ahmet had rambled all around. Chapter 1. Coming to America. The older I get, the more I realize how Turkish I am. I display the prime characteristics of Turkish vices, indolence and excess. Ahmet Ertegun. 1. As much as any man who ever lived, Ahmet Ertegun loved to tell stories. That many of them happened to be about himself was never the point. In his unmistakable nasal hipster's voice, tinged with the black inflections of the street and the syncopated rhythms of the jazz music he had loved since childhood, Ahmet always knew how to find the groove when he talked. With the smoke from a cigarette curling into his eyes and a drink in his hand, he was a born raconteur who could command an audience of any size. Taking just as much time as he needed to build the punchline, Ahmet would tell his favorite stories over and over again, carefully polishing each one like a jeweler. In a business where everyone loved to gossip, and the men who ran the world's leading record companies were constantly on the phone talking about one another in the most vulgar way imaginable, no one ever refused to take a call from the man whom they always referred to by only his first name. But then, long before most of his colleagues had made their bones in an industry where the ordinary rules of conduct did not apply, and the only way to stay on top was to continue putting out one hit after another, Ahmet was already a legend. On any given day, during even a casual conversation, there was no knowing what might come out of his mouth. It was just one of the reasons people liked being around him. Over the years, one story Ahmet loved to tell about himself was repeated constantly by those who would have never dared to criticize him in their own words. God only knows who told it to Steve Ross, but David Geffen first heard the story from him. Mo Austin and Joe Smith in Los Angeles knew it, as did Robert Stigwood in London. Outliving the man it was about, the story was posted on a well-read music blog after Ahmet was no longer around to tell it. In its simplest form, the story goes like this. During the early 1970s, Kit Lambert and Bill Curbishley, the current and future managers of The Who, found themselves locked in a particularly difficult and contentious negotiation with Ahmet in his second-floor office at Atlantic Records in New York City. Although Atlantic had made a ton of money distributing Fire, a huge but very unlikely worldwide hit by The Crazy World of Arthur Brown that Lambert had produced on his own label, their discussion soon reached a sticking point. No matter what Lambert or Kerbishley said, Ahmet simply would not budge. Knowing he had nothing to lose, Lambert, who in Kerbishley's words could sometimes be a bit Barnum and Bailey, suddenly leaped to his feet and stormed out of the office in a rage. Returning a few seconds later, he threw open the door and shouted at Ahmet, "Do you know why there's so much anti-Semitism in the world?" Always unflappable, most especially in situations where money was on the line and he was the one who would have to pay it, Ahmet said, "No, kid. Why is that?" "Because," Lambert replied, "Turks don't travel." Slamming the door behind him, Lambert then made his final exit as Ahmet collapsed with laughter behind his desk. More than most people in the music business, Kit Lambert would have understood the historical basis of his remark. Like his father, a well-known classical composer, he had been educated at Trinity College, Cambridge. He was also the grandson of the painter who had been commissioned by the Australian government to document that nation's crushing defeat by Turkish forces commanded by Mustafa Kemal at the Battle of Gallipoli during World War I. Whether any of this was actually on Kit Lambert's mind that day, no one can say for sure. However, the man who was the butt of his joke did not need anyone to explain it to him. In a business dominated by hard-driving Jewish businessmen, Ahmet was the ultimate outsider. On some level, this was also always his role in the world. Although Ahmet loved to mingle in the most rarefied circles of high society, he never truly belonged there either. In the most famous piece ever written about him, an unnamed woman, who seemed comfortable in this world, noted there was no one Ahmet did not feel snubbed by. Whenever another of his socialite friends sensed he was about to say or do something inappropriate, she would caution him by saying, "Ahmet, don't go Turkish on me. Don't go Turk." In order to warn the Rolling Stones that Ahmet was about to appear backstage before a show, their tour manager would tell them, "Boys, Ataturk's coming." Although he left his native land at the age of 2 and was shocked to see what Turkey was like when he returned there for the first time 6 years later, everything Ahmet was and all that he became was shaped by the place of his birth. Had it not been for the fall of the Ottoman Empire and the subsequent creation of the modern Turkish Republic, his own life would have followed an entirely different and far more predictable path. And yet, to the very core of his being, he could not have been more Turkish. For countless generations, the Turk, in the words of Stephen Kinzer, the author of Crescent and Star, Turkey Between Two Worlds, had always been viewed in the West as the scourge of civilization. His chief characteristics were thought to include mendacity, unbridled lust, sudden violence, and a passion for gratuitous cruelty. Beginning in 1095, when Pope Urban II sent the Crusaders to reclaim the holy city of Jerusalem from the Ottoman Empire, Europeans came to perceive Turks as the epitome of evil. They were presumed to be not only bent on destroying Christianity, but also determined to kill or enslave every man, woman, and child in Christendom. 5 centuries later, Martin Luther, who began the Protestant Reformation, declared, "The Turks are the people of the wrath of God." In a letter to King Frederick II of Prussia during the 18th century, the famed French essayist Voltaire wrote, "I shall always hate the Turks. What wretched barbarians!" After the Allies defeated the Ottoman Empire in World War I, the onerous conditions imposed by the Treaty of Sèvres were specifically designed to reduce a once great power to ruins. In large part, Mustafa Kemal's nationalist movement blossomed because of his refusal to abide by the provisions of the agreement, which soon proved impossible to enforce. His subsequent rise to power eventually forced all parties to the treaty to return to the negotiating table in Lausanne, Switzerland, in 1922. Mehmet Munir, who served as chief legal advisor and translator for the delegation from the Ottoman Empire during talks that went on for months, was present when the Treaty of Lausanne was signed on July 24, 1923, thereby bringing the modern Turkish Republic into being. 7 days later, Ahmet was born, as he would later recall, In a house on the rocky hills of Sultantepe in Üsküdar, on the Asiatic side of Istanbul, that grand old decaying city which had once been Byzantium and Constantinople. A child of privilege like his older brother Nesuhi, Ahmet spent the first 2 years of his life in a truly primitive land where nearly everyone was illiterate, life expectancy was short, epidemics commonplace, and medical care virtually non-existent. In a territory stretching for more than 1,000 miles, where most men eked out a living as subsistence farmers, there were only a few short stretches of paved road, and the most common means of travel was by horse-drawn cart. Most villages did not have a central square or plaza, reinforcing the widely held belief that life was meant to be lived within the family or clan. While those like Ahmet's father, who had been born and raised in Istanbul, enjoyed a far more cosmopolitan existence, nothing in his background could have prepared him for the rapid succession of sweeping social changes that transformed the remnants of the Ottoman Empire into the modern Turkish Republic in a relatively short period of time. Born into a family from Uzbekistan in Central Asia, Mehmet Munir was the grandson of a Sufi sheikh who presided over the Özbekler Tekesi, a dervish lodge in Istanbul. His father was a career bureaucrat who spent his life working in the Ministry of Monuments and Antiquities. His mother was one of the first Turkish women to make the pilgrimage to Mecca by camel. Exempt from military service by imperial decree because he had been born in the city where the Sultan held court, Mehmet Munir graduated from Istanbul University with a degree in law in 1908. He then began working in the imperial chancery, rising to the rank of chief legal advisor 8 years later. After his short-lived first marriage ended when he was in his 20s, his parents, in accordance with the custom at the time, arranged for him to wed Hayrunisa Rustem. 14 years younger than he, she could play any keyboard or stringed instrument by ear, loved to dance and sing, and, as Ahmet would later say, probably would have become a singing star or musician or performer if she had lived in a time when well-born girls were allowed on the stage. She was an outgoing, fun-loving, good-looking young girl who had been quite disappointed to find that the husband picked for her was a quiet, scholarly young law and philosophy student who did not share her love of music and dancing. 3 years after they were married, Mehmet Munir embarked on the journey that would change his life as well as the future of his homeland. On December 5, 1920, as part of a high-powered delegation headed by Salih Pasha and Ahmet İzzet Pasha, two of the Sultan's most trusted ministers, he traveled about 250 kilometers by train from Istanbul to the railway station at Bilecik to help negotiate an agreement to end the civil conflict between the Sultan and the new nationalist government in Ankara, headed by Mustafa Kemal. Unlike the leaders of the delegation and the great war hero they had come to meet, Mehmet Munir had never seen combat on any of the battlefields where the fate of the empire had been contested during the past 2 decades. Bespectacled, with a thick mustache and a receding hairline, he was then 37 years old, the father of a 3-year-old son, and a devout Muslim who prayed 5 times a day. After making the delegation wait for an entire day at the railway station, Mustafa Kemal finally arrived. 39 years old, with piercing blue eyes and high oriental cheekbones, he had the commanding look of a fearless soldier who had already proven himself in battle. Introducing himself as the prime minister of the government in Ankara, Kemal shocked Salih Pasha and Ahmet İzzet Pasha by asking them who they were. Explaining he could not possibly speak to them as cabinet ministers because he did not recognize the government in Istanbul, Kemal said he was perfectly willing to talk with them as fellow patriots. After a discussion that lasted for hours, Kemal told both men he could not let them return to Istanbul. Instead, they would now accompany him to Ankara so they could get a sense of what life was like under the nationalist government. Knowing they had no choice in the matter, the entire delegation boarded a train heading in the opposite direction from which they had come the day before. Although the word was never used, they were now being held as hostages. Because the nationalists controlled the army and no one in Istanbul could mount an expedition to free them, the delegation remained in Ankara for the next 3 months. When Salih Pasha and Ahmet İzzet Pasha realized Kemal's movement was directed not just against the foreigners occupying their homeland, but the Sultan as well, they both made it plain they could never cooperate. Not so Mehmet Munir. After a period of intensive soul-searching, he decided only Kemal and his followers could preserve what little was left of his beloved homeland. Switching sides, he threw in his lot with them. Born with the personality of a true diplomat, Mehmet Munir had a set of unique personal credentials that made him an immediate asset of great value to the new nationalist government. 2 years earlier, he had served as the chief legal advisor to the Ottoman delegation at the signing of the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk that forced Russia to return all the territory it had seized from the empire during World War I. He had already dealt with foreign powers across the bargaining table, and he was fluent in French, then the language of diplomacy all over the world. Unlike most of his colleagues, he also spoke English. On February 6, 1921, Salih Pasha and Ahmet İzzet Pasha signed a handwritten document giving Mehmet Munir official permission to attend the International Peace Conference that would begin in London 6 days later. To ensure his safety as well as their own, the signers made it plain they were being kept in Ankara against their will, and that Mehmet Munir had been repeatedly and insistently pressured to attend the conference because of his personal ability and professional knowledge. Serving as an advisor and a translator, he then represented the Ankara government at peace talks in England, to which the Sultan also sent his own set of representatives. In March 1921, Kemal finally decided to allow the rest of the delegation to return to Istanbul, on the condition that Salih Pasha and Ahmet İzzet Pasha would not resume their government positions, which they both soon did. When Mehmet Munir's wife read the morning newspaper, only to learn that everyone but her husband had returned safely to Istanbul, she was furious. In every sense, he had now become the odd man out. Unlike those who had chosen to continue supporting the Sultan, Mehmet Munir had aligned himself with a movement that, in time, would change the modern world. For him it had all begun with the decision he made after his fateful meeting with Mustafa Kemal in the railway station at Bilecik on December 5, 1920. Although Mustafa Kemal himself once proclaimed, "I have no religion, and at times I wish all religions to the bottom of the sea," Mehmet Munir steadfastly continued to roll out his carpet to pray 5 times a day, even after he had become one of Kemal's most trusted aides. In Ahmet's words, "Although my father was basically a timid man, he had great stubbornness in living out his convictions and defending his beliefs. His sense of morality somehow governed all his actions." In 1925, Kemal rewarded Mehmet Munir for his service to the new republic by appointing him the ambassador to Switzerland. As Ahmet would later write, his father left behind the teeming hodgepodge of the Istanbul that he loved, the shoeless porters, the grimy street kids, the blind beggars, the black-shawled peasant women, the hawking vendors, all of whom hovered below the countless majestic mosques and minarets that formed the skyline of this mysterious city, crossroads of many civilizations. The last stop of the Orient Express, the last capital of the fallen Ottoman Empire, the sublime port, the city of my father's dreams. Accompanied by his wife, his 2 sons, and their newborn daughter, Selma, Mehmet Munir set off to represent his fledgling nation's diplomatic interests in Bern. Beginning what would become a life of constant travel, Ahmet embarked on the long and highly improbable journey that eventually brought him to the land where he would make his fame and fortune. 2. In the clean, quiet serenity of the capital city of Bern, with many green gardens, parks, churches, clocks, and chimes, Ahmet's first real childhood memory of himself was as a 2.5-year-old boy playing in the immense gardens of the Turkish legation. Befitting his status as the Turkish ambassador to this bland, beautiful, sterile country, Mehmet Munir and his family were now able to live in a manner that would not have been possible in their still impoverished and chaotic homeland. Their large house at 18 Kalçekveg was staffed by several servants the family had brought with them from Turkey. A young Swiss governess who spoke French took care of Ahmet, who was soon communicating with his brother and sister in a mixture of Turkish and French, with a sprinkling of the French-German patois that we picked up on the street and in kindergarten. Charged with more responsibility than ever before, Ahmet's father was always busy working. In addition to his diplomatic duties in Bern, he made regular visits to Geneva, where in 2 years...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?